There, we're both on.
Yay.
Okay. All right. So let's get started. So this is the first time I'm doing this, and I'll just give you a little bit of background for those who are watching or will be watching on replay. So I'm Tiffany with Rock Bottom Wellness, and I'm a board certified and licensed nutritionist. This is my second career. I came to this career after a diagnosis of thyroid cancer, which totally changed my life in 2007. I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer and was told it was the easy one. And so when I realized it wasn't so easy, I was really surprised and frustrated. And that's when I just really started searching for answers over the next several years. And I've been able to find my way through this to feel better for the most part. And I just wanted to talk to other people in similar circumstances, whether it's cancer or other health conditions, just so we can talk about it and share with it so people can learn about how awesome you can live despite having something that's kind of scary into your life when it comes to your health. So I have a very special guest today. We're both from a little town in North Dakota. It's called Mayville. And we've sort of found each other again after similar journeys over different spans of time. But I would think you would feel very encouraged and hope-filled when you hear her story. So I just want to introduce you to her in a second. So I just want to let you know that you can put questions and comments in the feed, and we can answer those as we go or at the end. And also, if you want to know more about nutrition and health, you can go to my rockbottomwellness.com page, or you can ask to join my Nutrition for Thyroid Health page as well. So, all right, here is Chris's bio. Kristine Olson is a mom, a wife, a sister, a daughter, a friend, and a professional. Her attitude in life has always been go. This was usually done with the idea that I'll take care of myself later. With a family health history that includes diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, her main focus was on managing her high blood pressure and attempting to manage her weight, both of which began to creep as she aged, but both of which she figured she'd manage at some point. She would be the first to tell you I lived like I had a spare body in the trunk that I could pull out and put on when I needed it. That's probably pretty common. So in May 2017, on her daughter's 14th birthday, Kristine got the news none of us wants, a diagnosis of breast cancer after a routine mammogram. So I'm gonna let you fill in the rest for this. So do you wanna tell us about your personal story, if you wanted to start with that a little bit, Chris?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to advocate for getting your routine exams because without that, we don't really know where we're starting or what do we need to do. So I had not had a mammogram for 3 years. I kept putting it off, and it wasn't for any other reason that, I thought I was too busy and I'd get back to it later. And now, of course, I regret that. I don't know if I spend any time thinking about woulda, coulda, shoulda, but it was something that I definitely needed to have on the radar. So I work in healthcare, so I'm familiar with what processes are and things like that. And so as I'm sitting in the exam room, and they had called me back because I had an abnormal architecture, is what the report said. And I was that patient that I honestly don't remember what they said past, it looks like breast cancer. And that night going home and they said, you have to come back tomorrow and we're going to do a biopsy. And that night I went home and we told the kids, and we didn't know anything other than you're just stunned and so shocked. Mm-hmm. And I cried that night, and my whole attitude on life, like I said, is go, I can do it. I can take care of it. I can handle it. And that particular night, I cried myself to the point where I was almost physically sick. And at 4:00 in the morning, I got up and I said, we will never go through another day like that again. And that was the moment, regardless of what they were going to tell me the next day, of we're going to hit this, we're going to hit it head on, we're going to hit it informed, we're not going to hide anything, and we're going to move forward. Mm-hmm. So I got the diagnosis on a Friday, or the biopsy, I should say. I didn't get the diagnosis till Monday because, of course, they had to send the labs in. And it seems odd that they always do those things on Friday and you have to die, over the weekend.
That's what happened to me exactly too, Friday to Monday.
And in between, I had the greatest advice anybody ever gave me. And it's a friend of mine who also is on a cancer journey. And he told me, he's like, Chris, you got to stay in your square. And I'm like, what? He goes, stay in your square. Like if you know the results aren't coming back till Monday and it's Friday, then you enjoy the hell out of Saturday and Sunday, and you don't worry about the calendarization. You stay in your square. And that's one thing that would be lesson number one through this whole journey.
Yeah, that's
Is,
awesome.
because we spend, and you've spent all
Mhm.
this time projecting what's coming. Oh my God. And you think so far ahead. And instead it's like, what can I do today? How am I going to handle today? And that's
Right.
what you need to focus on. So I got the diagnosis that yes, it was breast cancer. I too was told, well, Chris, it's the good breast cancer. And I remember thinking, like, who says that? Right.
Yeah.
And then we started on a journey, and it went so fast because it seems like it was oncology appointments, and I had a port placed, and I had all these scans for baseline and all this blood work. And then the next thing I knew, it was like, boom, we were in chemo. And the plan was we were going to do chemo, then we were going to do surgery, then we were doing radiation, and in a year and a half, you'll be done. And I remember looking at the oncologist saying, okay, well, wait a minute now. How am I going to get through chemo? Like, what is it I need to know about chemo? And he looked at me and he said, well, you're a professional. And I find that the women who struggle the most during chemo are professional women. And they struggle because there's a fear of, chemo brain, that you're going to lose your memory on things. You struggle to maintain, what if I get sick? And so he said to me, I'm going to offer you the advice I give all my professional women. And that is, number one, don't read about anything, what to expect. And I don't know about you, but I never read the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting.
Yeah.
Because, when I was pregnant, if it would have said you're going to grow a third horn, I would have totally thought I was going to have that happen.
For sure.
So instead I went home and I started looking like, how do I optimize it? And what I quickly found out during chemo was optimization meant exercising to metabolize the chemo. It meant getting enough sleep. It meant making sure that you don't get sick, that you're not at risk, because your numbers will drop. And if your numbers drop, you can't continue with chemo. It meant eating well and not knowing how my body was going to react to the chemo. I started reading, and I reached out to a dietitian friend. I reached out to you and thought, okay, what is it I need to know going into this so I can optimize and I have some control over what I can contribute to the process. I also think mentally, right off the bat, I had one person tell me, oh my God, chemo is a poison in your body. And mentally, I could not accept that.
Mm-hmm.
Mentally, I had to think of it as, this is a gift that's killing off all the crap that doesn't need to be in my body. Right. So right out of the gate, it was, what can I do physically? What can I do emotionally? What can I do nutritionally? What can I do spiritually? I journaled, like, before I went into this. My husband and I sat down and talked about, how are we going to handle our kids? How are we going to handle friends? And if you remember, the day I had my biopsy, I posted on Facebook because I needed, and by the way, this is what worked for me.
Yeah.
I needed that instantaneous community that was going to be there, support me. And my mom died 4 years ago. So my mom would have been my biggest cheerleader.
Absolutely.
And she was gone. My dad had pulmonary fibrosis and he was limited. And so that cheerleader wasn't what it should be. So immediately I needed that community. And I found myself asking people, like I asked the mammogram person who they place a pin, in your breast once they've identified where the tumor is. And I'm like, okay. She said, I've done this. And I'm like, okay, what's your words of advice? She said, be as transparent as you need to be and ask for help because you're going to need it. So I started collecting, like, okay, those are action items I can take. But as I went through chemo, I discovered very quickly, the first round of chemo I had, you feel so super weird because they're pumping stuff into your body and you have this like disorientation feeling, right? Mm-hmm. And it took me about 4 days to say, okay, don't like the steroids because you have to be on steroids. Yeah. I had to take shots within 24 hours of having all my chemo. Didn't like that because that was going into my stomach, and that helps boost your white count. And I didn't like the goofy feeling I had. So then I started thinking, okay, I got to walk. And I remember walking with my kids, the dog, my husband, literally to the point where I'd get halfway around the block and said, I don't think I can get home. And they'd be like, you have to keep walking. because
Wow.
we have to metabolize, you know, it was, and what the why. And
Mhm.
then drinking a ton of fluid, you know, so, and I immediately, when I talked to the dietitian and I talked to you and I talked to others, it was more of a paleo vegan diet, like the
Mhm.
pagan diet,
Yep.
where, you know, I was told right off the bat, limit your red meat consumption,
Mhm.
talk about organic, because I am, even though I don't have any cancer in my body, by the way, right now, it was
Awesome.
estrogen positive. So
Okay.
where are your estrogen sources coming from?
Yep.
So I eliminated soy only because I had read about, you know, the phytoestrogens in soy, and there's a lot of data out there about whether soy is the right thing to do or not. And at that point in my diagnosis, I said no soy. I minimized chicken. My doctor told me, you know, Chris, you probably want to look at organic. You probably want to look at what the definition of cage free, pasture raised, you know, and all these things, because there isn't a lot of regulation around that. So
No.
I learned about that. I made a personal choice to eliminate alcohol. At that point in time, sugar, I read somewhere at one point in time that a cancer cell eats up like 18 times more sugar than a normal cell because
Yeah.
it lives and thrives on sugar. So I made the conscious decision to eliminate alcohol, to eliminate any unprocessed, you know, foods or, you know, that weren't pure. Um, I can't tell you the last time I had a cupcake or a cookie,
Mhm.
because I made the conscious decision that that wasn't worth it. I limited caffeine, and my choice for limiting caffeine in coffee was because it jacked my blood pressure and I was having enough anxiety around everything.
Right.
So I eliminated that. I chose not to drink pop because I couldn't identify what was in it. So I started
Mhm.
eliminating pop. And by the way, this was not immediate. You know, this was a slow
Right.
migration as you go through it. Um, and I went through, I was supposed to have 16 rounds of chemo. Four are what they call AC, or for those that are familiar with the Red Devil. And then I was
Mhm.
supposed to move to Taxol. And I made it through the 4 rounds of AC flawless. I didn't throw up. After my first round, I didn't have nausea. I didn't take the anti-nausea drugs. I took what they gave me in the chemo pack, but after that, I didn't. And I attribute my success in that to walking, to making sure I was metabolizing, to drinking water. And I took probiotics. And I did a lot of research about fermented foods and keeping your
Mhm.
GI tract healthy, because
Yep.
that too is where everything goes through. Um, and that was the first round. When I got into Taxol, I had an allergic reaction to Taxol. So I made it 1 round in 5 minutes. My reaction consisted of rapid heartbeat. My blood pressure took off. I started to choke. Um, and they shut everything down. They give you Benadryl while you're taking Taxol. And they were trying to decide, was I allergic to what the chemo was in, or was it truly Taxol that I was allergic to? I ended up in that round of Taxol with a severe UTI that sent me to the emergency room. And I can openly say I'd never had a UTI. And that was probably the single worst part of my chemo journey, was the UTI.
Yeah.
That's
Not pleasant.
horrible. Yeah. And during that, I learned about dehydration. You know, you got to keep your body um, hydrated. You have to, again, eat well. And as I was going through the UTI piece is when they discovered that I had a nodule in my lung. And that nodule was probably related to some pneumonitis as a result of the chemo. So they
Okay.
shut everything down. So then we were at a standstill, because if that traditional method of chemo wasn't going to work, what were they going to do to shrink my tumor? And by the way, I don't really like talking about the stage of my cancer,
Right.
because, as you and I have talked about, staging, first of all, is changing according to, you know, the cancer world as far as how they're staging stuff. But second of all, each cancer patient is unique. And that's another message I would want to share with people out
Yes.
of this, is your diagnosis and your staging becomes part of the pathology of how they're going to treat you. What was unique about mine was how large my tumor was. And we named my tumor. When I saw him on the ultrasound, he looked like a big hairy cat. So we named him Harry the Cat.
Yep.
And so for a large portion of time, it was hashtag hate Harry. And Harry was about the size of a golf ball. And what was crazy about it was people would say to me, how could you not feel that? And I think as women, traditionally, we've been taught to look for the size of a pea, right? So I wasn't expecting a wall of a tumor. I've always had very fibrous, dense breasts. And so that was not something I felt. And of course, when they pointed it out, then I could feel it. And
Right.
so part of my challenge was the size and the architecture of the tumor I had. So anyway, back to the story. They made the decision.
Just to interrupt you for a second. I've seen some comments. Danny Brewstead says he noticed the John Deere tractor in the back. Very
right?
appropriate. Yeah.
That's a tip to my dad.
Yep, exactly. And Steve from Coppell, but originally from Mayville. So that's
awesome.
Cool. Anyway, a few others watching too. So anyway, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. So what ended up happening then was that they decided they were going to starve the tumor because it was estrogen positive. And so at that point in time, that was, I started my journey last May. So it's important to note, I have not hit 6 months post, right? So I will be 6 months in August post everything. So they made the decision to starve the tumor. And at that point in time in August, then they started giving me Leuperon shots because I have not gone through menopause yet. So the Leuperon shots shut my ovaries down. And then they put me on letrozole, which suppresses the estrogen. And so for what would have been the duration of my chemo, I was on those two products. I guess that's the way you're going to talk about it. Until they got to a point where the tumor was shrunk enough that they felt they could operate. So some important just stats around that. People said, well, okay, you were done with chemo. Well, chemo stays in your body a very long time.
Yes.
And even though I only had 5 rounds in 5 minutes, and by the way, I want the credit for the 5 minutes because that was a weird experience to have the crash carts come in and, because I was having the reaction to it.
Right.
I shaved my head because I lost my hair during this period. So I was completely bald. I had a port placement that they had in. You feel weak. You're incredibly tired. You keep thinking, I can't believe that this little run of drugs, and by the way, it comes in this, could knock my socks off like that. And so during that time, it was super important. Again, I don't want to get sick. I had to make sure I was not immunosuppressed by being around people that were ill. You can't swim in a river with a port. You have to kind of be careful where you are. You don't want to get on an airplane with anyone because you're worried about anybody and everybody around you. So we practiced amazing hand hygiene in our family. And then really, again, still, it came back to what is it I can contribute? So I started looking at different books on cancer survivors, on diets. I had a friend from Mayville who sent me the book Radical Remission. I had another girlfriend that I had met that sent me the anti-cancer diet. Chris Carr is a cancer survivor who's written some things. So I started collecting all of these and started thinking about, again, it's this optimizing. Why would I spend all this money and time and effort on the drugs if I didn't feel I could have some control to optimize what I was contributing to the process? And so again, kind of moved even further then and decided, okay, I'm going to be a vegetarian. So I removed meat from my diet and have been looking at what are plant-based, because somewhere in amongst this too, we have heart disease in our family. And I have a cousin who's younger than I am. He had a heart attack and ended up with some stents. And in talking to him, he came back to me and said, plant-based diet is what my doctor's telling me. And I think that's been the biggest aha through this is you can take anything I'm talking about and take out the word cancer and put in heart disease, put in diabetes. None of this is rocket science. It's about finding out what is it that works for you. I can tell you sitting here today, I am cancer free. I feel the best I have ever felt. So to continue on with my amazing. But to continue on with my journey, I ended up in November, I had lumpectomy number 1, which they told me they did not expect to see it in my sentinel nodes. And as you know, they found cancer in 2 of my sentinel nodes. And that caused them to do an axillary dissection in my armpit of my axillary nodes. And so I ended up with surgery number 2 because they did not clear the tumor, which we didn't think they would because the architecture of my tumor was so interesting. So the second week in December, I had surgery number 2, which included taking out 19 lymph nodes total. And I know that freaks people out, but again, remember what I said about diagnosis and pathology. They ended up going right up against my chest wall and taking the fascia off my muscle to clear the margin of my tumor. And people often ask me, why didn't you have a mastectomy? I talked to my surgeon, who I had great faith in. That would be the next lesson learned. You got to have a relationship with someone you feel good with in this process as far as healthcare. And my surgeon said to me, I know exactly where I need to go and what I need to do. And so I trusted her, and she went in the second time. She came out and said, and I will never forget these words, kiddo, you're cancer free. You're going to go through radiation. You're going to be cured, and you're going to go on with your life.
That's awesome.
In this, my dad died. My dad died in this process. And so then we took another hit emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, all of that. Yeah. And again, I had to sit back and say, all right, now I got to get my shit together, right? Because now I'm in it to win it, and we got to keep moving along. And so I started radiation the first week in January. I had 30 rounds of radiation, which were, it took me longer to get in the building than to get on the table and actually have the linear accelerator radiate me. But out of that, you get more tired, you get more run down. When I walked into the oncologist's office the first day of radiation, she said to me, I want you to go home and look at all your numbers, and I want you to decide, how are you going to attack this? And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, I'm not going to cure you of cancer to have you have a stroke. And I went, oh my gosh, this whole time I've been focused on cancer. I forgot about all those other numbers, right? So then I had to go back. And so again, reading about how do I optimize this? And then I started reading about survivorship. And I don't like the word survivor. I want to thrive, right? I don't want to just survive. I want to be a thriver. So then I started looking at what are best practices for being a survivorship, and what are the key components in that? And again, it comes back to the same things. It's diet, exercise, it's stress management. I went to my oncologist and I said, okay, now I'm all done with this. And I'm not doing it again. So what is it I should learn? And my oncologist looked at me and he said, well, what do you think? I said, I think I need to diet. I need to lose weight. I need to exercise. And I need to manage my stress. And he started laughing and he said, Chris, we all need to do that. And then I went to the surgeon and I said, okay, the oncologist says I should diet. I should exercise. I should manage my stress. What do you think I should do? And she said, well, I would tell you to think about antioxidants, because we all know that there's inflammatory components. I would tell you to have some Eastern medicine, so some yoga, some stretching. And she said I'd probably save the Dairy Queen and the cakes for maybe once a month. Maybe it's once a quarter, because is that important? My oncologist said to me, Chris, what purpose did drinking have in your life? And of course, the smart ass in me was, well, to help me forget everything and to be a lot of fun, right? And so I kind of had to stand back and go, well, it really doesn't serve a purpose in my life, and it has too much sugar in it. So, okay, we're going to kick that one out. That one I can live with. So now it's been 15 months since I've had a drink, and I'm okay with that. Yeah. Then I decided the stretching was a big deal, because letrozole and Luperon make you really stiff, and they almost mimic having like rheumatoid arthritis. And there were days that I felt like that old lady that we all know from Mayville, North Dakota, that got out of the Buick and kind of had to lumber along, because her hips hurt. And so I decided that I needed to exercise. And so I started reading about exercise and reoccurrence. And breast cancer is the only cancer that they can link exercise to and say that exercise helps diminish the chances of reoccurrence. So, yeah. So I went and I'm like, okay. Yeah. So I'm like, how much do you have to exercise? Am I doing kickboxing? What am I doing? Because me, I'm all in. And they said, no, all you got to do is walk. Yeah. It's not intensity, it's duration. And so then I stood back and said, okay, well, they say an hour a day. And somebody said to me, oh my God, you're never going to be able to exercise an hour a day. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, can I cut it up? And they're like, yeah. Okay, so let's go back to work-life balance, stress management. Yeah. I bet if I got up from my desk twice a day and went around the block, which it takes me 14 minutes to go around the block at work, I bet that would help me, right?
Absolutely.
And then I started thinking, gosh, we have this 80-pound black lab that probably needs to be walked every morning. So why don't I get up in the morning? So I get up and I walk the dog for 27 minutes around the block in the morning. I do my 2 laps around the block during the day, and I finish my day off with a walk. And guess what? I hit 60 minutes a day.
That's
Then I
amazing.
decided, okay, so I'm going to be plant-based. What are the plant-based? Because, there's a lot of vegetarians that are still fat, right? So I still need to lose weight because fat produces estrogen. And remember, I'm estrogen positive. So I still am working on that one because I hit 50. They pushed me through menopause. My dad died. I can't drink, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, that's a lot of stuff. So
That
I'm
is a lot of
working,
stuff.
I'm still working on that one, right? But I looked at spiritually, what do I need to do? I was brought up in Mayville, North Dakota, Mayville Lutheran Church, went to confirmation. Do I believe in God? Yes. Do I need to have a strong faith for me personally? I'm not going to say that that's for everybody. For me personally, I had to go back to that stuff that you and I learned in Sunday school.
We
Because,
memorize.
right. And it was something to hang on to. And it
Yeah.
is something that grounds me in meditation and
Mhm.
reminds me that there are bigger things in the world. And you know what? There's not a day that goes by that I don't run into somebody that I go, oh my God, I don't have that. So you
Right.
have to be positive about where you are, and you have to think about that. And again, I try to stay in my square. I don't think about 30 years down the road, 40 years down the road. Easter time, I was back in Mayville and I went to see Alice Strand's 100th birthday party. And somebody asked me, well, why did you go to that? And I said, well, I kind of want to know what to expect, right? So when should I be
You turn
planning now?
100.
Right. But Alice Strand is sitting there with her hair done and her makeup on. And I thought, okay, that's another component of this. Are you going to show up
Yeah.
every day and feel good and look good? So I had to think about that. And I was growing my hair back because you're bald. And I chose not to wear a wig during chemo. And my choice to not wear a wig was based on I'm okay having breast cancer and I'm okay people asking about it, because we need to share the message of get your routine tests, and there's more hope in it than there is despair. Breast cancer research is changing every 3 to 4 months. So you kind of have to get a filter on about what people want to share with you, because the technology and the drugs and the research is just booming. So that's a positive.
Right.
I chose not to wear a wig because honestly, I don't like doing my hair anyway. So I will admit there was a point of being bald that I'm like, I like this.
This
right?
is okay. Yeah.
It's okay. And then, but we had to talk about that. Did it embarrass my kids? Did it embarrass my husband? Did it make anybody uncomfortable? And what did it mean? Because we needed to walk through that as a family. So you have to be okay with who you are. And now I'm coming back and it's super curly. And I had to figure out how to manage that because it does do a different texture to your hair. And
well, it's very different from when you were in high school.
Right, where it was super long. Yeah, it was long to my waist, and now I have this faux mohawk that
it's awesome.
I've had a couple people ask me which gender I am, but that's okay. So we're learning about that too. And then I had to look at meditation, because I'm my own worst enemy. I overanalyze everything. Last week, I caught myself thinking, oh my God, what if I only have 30 years left? And then I'm like, okay, get your arms around that. I self-diagnose a lot. I thought I had brain cancer in May, and I backed out of the garage and ripped the mirror off my car because I was so fixated on if I had brain cancer or not. And the reality is, it was allergy season and I had a headache from, so you kind of have to work through, am I feeling something because I'm scared? Am I thinking something because it's an emotion? Christmas was very emotional for me, and I cried and cried and cried. But guess what? My dad had died, and I had to kind of process that too.
Yeah.
But the food part of this is so essential, and the nutrition and exercise, because of how I've been able to cope with everything else. I meditate. I would recommend to people Headspace, the app. Totally rocks, and I can walk around the block and put Headspace in, and sometimes I have to listen to it 2-3 times to get recentered. But my blood pressure has gone down. My glucose levels have leveled out because I have eliminated stuff from my diet, and because I'm very deliberate. someone said to me, well, if you have that kind of time, and I would challenge anybody, I got a team of 54 that I oversee. I have a very stressful job. I'm the mom, I'm a wife. Again, if I haven't mentioned, my dad died during all of this.
Mhm.
I'm 50, so I'm probably at the peak of my career. I try to be active in my community. And what I realized was I don't have any more or less time than I did pre-cancer, but I focused differently and I'm being
Yeah.
deliberate. And I'm not joking when I say I lived like I had a spare body in the trunk of my car, and we would joke about it, and it's nothing to joke about, because once you're given a diagnosis, then you start backpedaling pretty damn quick, you
Yeah,
know.
and that's exactly why I started, it took time to start doing what I was doing because, um, you don't want to have people hit their rock bottom before they start to wake up and do something. And I think a lot of people live like what you were saying, that you have a spare body in the trunk to just put on and use when you need it. And that's not the case. And you are being so proactive. And what I think is hard is when you get a diagnosis, and especially when you hear cancer as your
Mhm.
diagnosis. And I mean, I haven't gotten another diagnosis, but I have, been through that process with my dad as well. And you get these horrible, horrible words said to you. You are paralyzed. You're paralyzed with fear. You're paralyzed with what and who can support me and how do I do this? And like for me, some of the frustration was I just did whatever they told me to do, and I didn't ask questions. And I'm like you. I mean, I was teaching. I mean, I knew the anatomy physiology of my situation, not to the depth that got to learn about
Mhm.
it. But all I knew, it was scary. It was just bad. So you were able to really early on be extremely proactive. And I think I was more passive, and I don't know why. What do you think it was that made you click? Is it
Well, I
just
think
what
that
that nurse said to you, or
I
I don't
think
know.
there were a couple things that clicked for me, and by the way, you've heard me say this, and other people have heard me say this. When you come out of radiation, they say to me, "All right, what has cancer done for you?" And
Mhm.
immediately the first thing out of my mouth was, "It saved my life." And the doctor
Yeah.
kind of went, "What?"
What?
And I said, "Oh my God," because it brought such awareness. And I have struggled with my weight my whole life. I've struggled with my blood pressure. I'm a control freak. I overthink everything. I'm super uber competitive. And I think for me, the trigger point was that gal. As I'm standing there, like completely helpless, it blew me away how when they said that diagnosis, I literally, Tiffany, I couldn't hear anything
Hmm.
anyone was saying. I can
Yeah.
still see the radiologist standing there talking to me, and I couldn't hear a word he was saying.
Hmm.
And for me, I think it was, I can either be hopeless and crawl into a corner and damn it, I'm not ready to give up, or I can be empowered. And what do I have control over?
Right.
You know, and what can I influence? And I just watched all those drugs go by that they're pumping India. And I thought, okay, that's going to kill it. How am I going to maintain it? And what can I
Right.
do that gives me some sense of power or control? And again, like I said, I look back on it now, and it's been 6 months, and I'm not saying I'm going to be cancer free forever. There's no guarantees with any of us, but it's what can I do to minimize any chance of it returning?
Right.
And in all the books I had read, part of the process, and you've probably gone through this as well, is the acceptance, the denial. You start bargaining. I have never asked the question, why did I get cancer? Because we all have cancer cells in us.
Hmm.
What I asked was, well, wait a minute, why did I get it now? Why did I get it at 49? Why did I get it? What was it? And I've had numerous doctors look at me and say, well, you got to look at how at risk were you? And I'm like, okay, so what does that mean? My mom died 4 years ago. We had to work with my mom to help her make the decision, what machine was she going to turn off?
Hmm.
And I think that stress, I look back on that. We didn't go to grief counseling afterwards. We're good. My dad's Middle Eastern, mom's Norwegian. You don't talk about that stuff, so we just, we just absorbed it, right? And sucked it in. Shortly after mom dies, my uncle Bob dies, and he was, my dad's best friend, and that blew me away. And then we had a cousin who died. My father-in-law died the next year. That took the wind out of us. And then my dad, in the meantime of all of this, is diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis. And at the time of my dad's death, he had 46% lung capacity. So we've got all these balls in the air. And then I get diagnosed. I have a son, by the way, a 12-year-old who was diagnosed with autism during all of this. So I look back on it, and I know, right? We've had our
why didn't you get, it's like,
why didn't I get cancer? But you know what? I don't like talking about that sometimes, because all of us have those kinds of stress. Yeah. All of us have those plates in the air. And I think the at-risk part was I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't focused on my blood pressure. I wasn't trying to lose weight. I'm the person that stuffs food in my mouth to cope. I was drinking wine because that made me forget about everything and feel good. I wasn't exercising. I was in that rut of poor me victim. I didn't like it there. I didn't like how it felt, but man, I was going to ride that horse into the ground, right? Of self-pity. And the slap in the face was, okay, well, now it's your turn. What are you going to do about it? And like I said, for me, it was something different. Now, I do have to tell you this. After I had surgery, I went into the oncologist and I said, oh my God, like when you cut that out of my breast, I feel phenomenal. Like, do you think the cancer was so ingrained in my body? And she looked at me and she goes, Chris, you were fat and out of shape. And I went, oh, okay. So,
okay.
Right. I hadn't thought about that. So it was what it comes back to is I know there are circumstances and cases. I'm not saying this for everyone. So whoever's listening, please don't take it that you've done something wrong. But I was not contributing to the well-being of myself, whether it be mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, nutritionally, none of those. And I think for me, the check was, do you want to live? And hell yeah, I got a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old. I'm only 50 years old. I got a lot of stuff to do. How am I going to make that happen? And that's where it went.
The sad thing is, I mean, we already touched on this a little bit, but when you were saying you weren't taking care of yourself, like so many people, I mean, I actually think that's more normal, people not taking care of themselves, but they don't even know they're not taking care of themselves.
Well, and I think as women, I'm not dissing men at all, but as women, we kind of get in that victim mentality of, well, everybody else before us, right? And I was queen of that. The other thing I was queen of is everything's fine. I mean, you could talk to my sister. It's like a running joke in our family. When Chris is out of balance when she says, I'm fine, because that was my stress threshold. Yeah. Somehow I had been brought up in an environment that if you weren't a martyr, you weren't doing it right. And I just assumed I'll take care of everyone else and I'll take care of myself last. And, I was living on Prilosec because my stomach didn't feel good and my blood pressure was out of whack. And I had the gym membership that I didn't go to because I don't have time. And the unfortunate piece, and this is the message, don't get to rock bottom because it's ugly and it's gross. And you have a choice when you're at the bottom. Am I going to stand up on my own? Because that was the other piece here that's not so fun. My husband is phenomenal. My kids are phenomenal. I had a group of women, my first responders. I have my entire Facebook family, Mayville, Portland, North Dakota, every relative I have that rallied around me. Yeah. But the only person who could stand up and make a difference was me.
Right.
So you do have that moment of, there's nothing I can buy. There's nothing I can, I have to decide I'm going to do these things. And I have to decide, like this morning, I was laying in bed and I'm like, God, I do not want to get up and walk my 27 minutes around the block. And, luckily the 80-pound black lab lays on top of me and that helps me get going. But I'm like, right. But I also say to myself, if I don't do that 27 minutes today and hardwire that behavior, then tomorrow I might not do the 27 minutes. And that terrifies me because I want to have the best life I possibly can. And, the byproduct of this is we're teaching my kids. I'm teaching the people I work with. I'm hoping things like this get the message out. First get your preventive tests, stay in your square, find work-life balance, figure out what your stress is, forgive yourself. Oh my gosh, we haven't even touched on, I had to kind of dig through me and say, oh my gosh, what is the crap I've been carrying with me that I have to forgive myself about so that I care about myself enough to make these changes?
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you don't feel good, for me, it was all nutrition, because the first thing I wanted to do was grab whatever it was and shove it in my face to quote,
Whatever's
make me feel good.
easiest.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was the nutrition, and it was trying to figure out what is the pathway that I can live with, that I know I can hardwire. How much do I want it? And then knowledge. And knowledge is a scary thing, isn't it? Like, I
It
want to
is.
know, but I don't want to know.
It's good
Right.
and bad. Yeah.
Yep. So it's getting your tests, and it's finding out what your baseline is, and then figuring out how we're going to navigate it. So I just reached out to you, right? Because my liver test coming back, the Lupron shots put you in a weird range. So then I was like, oh my gosh, what do I need to do to make my liver healthy?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that it's bad. It's just, is it going to be a pill, or is it going to be food, or is it going to be exercise, or am I going to ignore all of it until it gets to a threshold where then we're in a crisis?
Right.
And I think that's the other message to this. Don't ignore it till it gets to a crisis point, and then
Yeah.
then you're really bogged down because none of the other stuff comes into play.
And I think that's really common too. And I know that from, dealing with being around with my dad's health and stuff. And it's easy to just be like, okay, well, it's not think about that or not worry about that, or, you might not understand some of the stuff that's going on. And if you don't deal with it head on, then something else develops. So you dealing with your liver, concerns, different elevation of those enzymes during this process. It's amazing. Again, being proactive and not just letting life pass you by, not
Right.
just letting, because it sounds like you have had a phenomenal team of medical professionals with you. And I think most of the time that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, our systems are so big that we can get lost in the shuffle. And I was at Mayo, and at the time, for a few things, I totally got lost in the shuffle. And then you're
Right.
kind of left just wondering what you're kind of on your own, and you have to figure
Right.
it out yourself. And that was the frustrating part for me. And so again, same as you, looking into the nutrition piece, even when my doctors were saying it's not really a big deal, you can just do what you want, just eat healthy. Well,
and the interesting
that's
piece,
very
like
different for everybody.
when I sat down and said, okay, so what is it? I really haven't hit a health professional, and this isn't, please don't think the health professionals have been phenomenal, but nobody can really settle on like, what's the diet, right? Because that was me. Like, what do I need to join? What do I need to do? And nobody can really say, well, it's this way, that way, or the other way. So that's when I started looking at it. And like I said, for me, my choice and my rationale is plant-based. Although I have to watch, am I getting enough protein? Am I getting enough, all the other pieces that I need in it? For a long time, I was like, God, I feel like weak. Well, then somebody said to me, hey, are you counting how many calories you're getting each day? So I added them up, and I'm like, oh my God, like 400. Okay, well, there would explain why I feel like,
that could make me weak.
that could make me weak. So then I had to like consciously think, okay, now so it's almost like I went to one side of the road, and then you have to come back to the middle. But you have to be an advocate for yourself. You have to be aware. And again, people, I'm not saying I'm perfect. Like every once in a while, my 12-year-old is classic. We're at the Dairy Queen, and I'm like, I'll have cheese curds. And over here is this 12-year-old saying, hey, Mom, I thought you were going to eat better. And I'm like, okay, I'll cancel the cheese curds.
Darn you.
Right. But can I have one cheese curd?
Yeah.
So, you still, my approach has been more, okay, stop and think. What's the one thing I can do for myself today? And when I sit down to eat and I'm starving and we're at a restaurant and I'm like, I don't want to make a good choice. Okay, stop, take a deep breath. What's the best food choice you can make? And sometimes it is, whatever. And sometimes it's a salad and then the reward. My kids and I have made it that when I go in for my appointments, if we get a clear bill of health, that's my Dairy Queen day. Yeah. And my Dairy Queen day, by the way, started out with a small blizzard. And I got to tell you, after your glucose levels, you're like, blah, and then, so now my Dairy Queen day is getting smaller and smaller.
It's like the pup.
Right. On my 50th birthday, we went to Las Vegas, and I spent, and for those of you who know me, it's just like overanalyze everything. I spent this tremendous amount of time like, oh my gosh, is it going to be a dessert or a glass of wine to celebrate? So I actually started looking up which were the lesser of the two evils. and finally came down to, yeah, I'm probably not going to enjoy either because I haven't had it for so long.
Right.
And that's not what I crave anymore. So I actually then said, well, you know what? I'm going to go to the spa and have a massage, and that's going to be my 50th birthday present.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, and that
Yeah.
rocked. You know, the old Kristine, by the way, would have been like, it's a bottle of wine. We're doing, you know, French fries, you know, and I just don't feel good when I do it anymore. And that, you know,
Right.
that's the other piece to this. I feel amazing every single day.
Mhm.
And I know it's because of the decisions I've made. And again, I'm not perfect at it, but it's a migration of where do I want to be and how do I want to live? And, you know, the key component is I want to live.
Well, and you have totally honed in on what, you've made the connections between what you're eating and how you're feeling, because you didn't dive into some wacky plan or some kind of product or system, or I don't know what I'm trying to say. Just
Yep.
just
There's no easy
fad quick
fix.
fix.
Yeah.
You didn't jump into some ice cream diet, or I don't know, all these crazy things you hear about, and it's where a lot of people do because it's reactive and you're scared and just, okay, I'll just do this because this, for whatever reason. And you're now, like you said, you're evolving in your transition of how you're eating. You're eating for you. It may not fit for everybody else, but it works for you. You feel amazing. And now the wine or the dessert or the French fries or whatever, it was like, not really worth it. But then you ended up by taking care of yourself physically.
That becomes worth it. Yeah.
That's way more worth it in the end. And that's I know, a huge thing. The other component I want to talk about, you talked about your family a lot, and sat down and talk, how do you talk to your kids about this when you get this diagnosis? What does this mean for just navigating, the hair loss and all these things that you're going through and the anticipation of that? How did your kids deal with this, and how did you help them deal with it?
So the first thing, and I want to stage this for you. I was told the staging is I had my mammogram, I went in for an ultrasound, and then they told me I had to come back for a biopsy. In between the ultrasound and the biopsy, it was only a 24-hour period. And the ultrasound, the radiologist is, scanning my armpit, and I'm like, oh my God, I know why we scan people's armpits, right? We're looking for lymph nodes. And they, at that point, said, we don't see anything in your lymph node, but there is a significant mass. Of course, they wouldn't diagnose it with a biopsy, but I'm like, this is cancer. Like, something in the back of my head was like, there is no way I'm getting out of this, right? And so I knew I was going in for the biopsy the next day, but I went home and I said to my husband, like, we got to tell the kids now. Like, there's no way. I'm such an open book anyway. So I went and picked up Sid, and she was 14, and it was her birthday, which kind of sucked. We have apologized for that over and over again. And said to her in the car, we got to talk about this. And she started to cry, and I explained what I knew. And we talked about our faith and how we have to have faith in each other as a family. And we got to talk about it. And Dad and I had made the decision we were going to be transparent. Then we came home and told Micah. And Micah is my son who's on the spectrum. And he was very concerned, but he came back and said, Mom, a lot of people live through this. And I'm like, you're right. A lot of people do. And that very first appointment we elected to go to as a family so that we could talk about it. Like I said to you, I put it on Facebook the minute I had the biopsy. I sent an email to all my nieces and nephews and my in-laws and family so that we were all getting the same information at the same time, because part of what you combat when you've been diagnosed is people filling in the blanks of what they think. Breast cancer or any type of cancer, there's this natural, oh my God, I know someone and this happened, and you're just bombarded. Everybody has a story. Yeah. And what you quickly learn is I can get sucked into that and have a panic attack, or sometimes I had to say to people, oh my gosh, I'm not ready to hear your story. I know you want to share it out of the goodness of your heart, but I can't handle that right now. And so we decided to be very transparent and open. Some people came to me and said, well, do you want to start a Caring Bridge site? And that was like, I'm also all about easy. I'm like, I have this huge Facebook family. I'm not going to Caring Bridge. No offense to Caring Bridge. But Facebook was my block party that I needed. And I could be funny and I could be transparent. And I've had some people come up to me and say, there's no way I would share what you shared on Facebook. And I'm like, well, that's your choice and you don't have to read it. For me, it was what I needed. My sister, who's genetically wired, I would think like me, said, I couldn't be that open. I'm much more, and she's much more of a private person. For me, I needed that instantaneous gratification of instantaneously people responding to me. I went to my 13 first responders who were girlfriends and guy friends and said, this is what I need you to be, and can you be this? And so I had this really core group of people that after surgery number 1, I was so bummed out. I was like, oh my God, I can't be alone in the house, even with the dog, right? So after surgery number 2, my friend Jill came and stayed with me for 4 days. And that was tough for me to have somebody in my space. But I'm like, oh my God, I need someone here. I don't want to talk to you. But she slept next to me in the basement while I was watching QVC in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep. That's what I needed so that Brian could take care of the kids and they could be, quote, normal.
Right.
My kids' friends, we talked with their parents. So it was very clear what was going on with me. And I had a really cool group of parent friends that would call me and say, what can I do for your kids? And they would show up with meals, which, like, oh my God, you just feel so like, oh no, I'm not that bad. I don't know what I thought the threshold had to be to ask for help.
Yeah, I know, some rule or something.
Right, some rule out there. But to let them, but it was my need to be open. And we did get to a point, by the way, where my daughter turned to me like October. Someone told me, thank God you weren't diagnosed in October, because every time you turn around, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month.
Yeah, for sure.
And my kids, in October, we were in Minneapolis shopping. And, every store we went into, do you want to make a donation to breast cancer awareness? Which then I'm like, oh my God, this is fantastic. I'm a breast cancer patient. And after store number 4, Sid turned to me and she's like, shut up. Do you have to tell everyone? And I'm like, well, first of all, the bald head gives it away. Okay.
Yeah.
Second of all, I love the support, but we did have to have like a timeout where we said, okay, no more cancer conversation. And actually using the phrase cancer with you tonight is unique because at our house, the word cancer is no longer part of our vocabulary.
Yeah.
We refer to it as my journey because we had to ignore it. At somewhere halfway point in the journey, we had to let go of #Harry because we decided that saying that we hated Harry the tumor was giving it too much energy. So we needed to support Harry and say, thank you for the lessons learned, but I don't need you in my body anymore.
Yeah.
And that was part of me having to reframe love in my life versus anger and emotion. So that helped. But yeah, my kids, my son Micah does go to therapy. And that part of that is his autism spectrum, but that gave him an outlet. Sid turned to her school family. My kids go to Oak Grove in Fargo, which is a Lutheran school, and they had a phenomenal set of teachers and families and parents that surrounded her. My in-laws, my mother-in-law, my dad while he was alive, my cousins, my nieces and nephews, my sisters and brother-in-laws all supported my kids. So yeah, we were fortunate, but I think the fortunate piece started because right out of the gates, we deliberately decided we were going to talk about it out loud. And out loud meant uncomfortable. Out loud meant sometimes it was embarrassing. Sometimes I had to ask my kids, am I embarrassing you? I took my daughter with me when my friend Sherry shaved my head. And we did it as a party. Yep. We did a mohawk with all and took pictures of everything. People asked me, what are you going to need? I said, I need hats. I need, my cousin Jamie put out there that he started a GoFundMe for massage therapy during my journey, which was overwhelming to me that someone would do that. People were buying t-shirts that said hate Harry and but it was part of the journey. We celebrated a lot, but we talked a lot, and every once in a while I would stop the kids and say, I'm going to be okay. Do you have any questions? We took them in to meet the oncologist so they knew what took place. They sat with me during chemo and we talked about this is what this drug does so that they learned. I've stripped our house clean of chemicals. I don't wear any makeup that has paraben in it. We don't use deodorant that's got aluminum in it. We have gone through our cleaning materials. I will be genetically tested for the benefit of my daughter. I haven't done that yet, but we will do that. but we had to go through everything. And then we had to talk about, my daughter's a volleyball player. So the first time I came home and said, hey, I have this natural deodorant. She was like, are you kidding me? Right. And so we had to talk through, why is that important to me? And when we talk about makeup, it takes seconds for that stuff to get into your bloodstream. So we talk about essential oils versus scented candles, because part of this is educating them so that they make wise choices. We talk about BMI, not because I want my daughter to be uber skinny, but what's a healthy weight that helps keep, the glucose down, because we have diabetes too in our family. So what are those things that we need to be aware of? Because I'm 50 and I don't have this down, and I keep wanting to blame my mom. My mom died at 72. I want to blame mom for all this and her relatives for the diabetes. And I kind of want to blame dad's side of the family. And then at some point as a parent, you look back and go, oh my God, I have kids. Like I was so focused on going this way. I'm not fixing anything going this way. And so then we decided, if the cycle's going to break, it's all about education and then living the healthy lifestyle, not just talking about it. You got to live it. I can't sneak stuff and hide candy bars in my car. That doesn't help anybody.
No. Someone posted on here, Kelly, I don't know if she's still watching or not, but she's a chemo nurse and she's down in my area here.
Yep.
But I love hearing how you've taken a negative situation and turned it into a positive one. And the thing is I bet she here, I don't know, like I said, if she's still on, it'd be cool to hear her chime in on that. I wonder what the mood, and I mean, you saw it too, but from the nurse's perspective, I wonder what the mood and feel is in the chemo room,
And I would have to say our chemo crew was amazing. First of all, chemo nurses are like the coolest people on the planet. The very first day I went in,
Kelly.
Yep, one of the chemo nurses turned to me when she was going to put the AC into me, the Red Devil, and I stopped her and I said, okay, we're going to do this. We're all in the room. I said, can we pray over it? And she looked at me and she said, can I pray for you? And I was like, oh my God, yes. How cool is that? Yeah. And I don't even remember her name, but she prayed for us. And that was so cool to bring us together, because I can't imagine what they see. My chemo scenario was a little different than the average person, because I had a chemo crew. On any given time I went into chemo, I had 12 to 15 people in the room with me cheering me on, which at first was a little, again, I'm not used to like, oh my God, I'm fine. But we got in there and people wanted to be supportive. People wanted to sit there and I was feeling guilty. I'm like, oh my God, this is Friday afternoon at 2:00. You should be working. And people are like, no, we're here to support you. And that was so cool because it made the time fly.
I wondered about that because I'd see some of those posts with your crew and I'm like, what's going on there? It looks like a party, so it's the whole
totally was a party.
Yeah.
And
Kelly says she wants to hug you. She wants to hug you right now.
But, and the chemo nurses, we talked about, why do they have to be all gowned up? Because my kids didn't understand that.
Yeah.
We talked about the chemo bag and what was in it. The very first time, by the way, and Kelly would know this, that I went into the bathroom and you pee red when you have AC and you're like, holy crap, what's going on? And then we had to talk about, things you don't know. You have to flush the toilet twice after you've had chemo. So we had these long conversations about why the kids couldn't use my bathroom, couldn't drink out of my water bottle. And then in the middle of the night when you're laying on the floor in the bathroom waiting for the toilet to refill so you can flush again, you're thinking about like, well, should I clean while I'm in here? And what should I be doing? Right.
Yeah.
And I finally got to the point where it was like, okay, well, while I'm waiting for the toilet to refill, I mean, it sounds funny. What are the things I'm grateful for? And I have to come up with stuff until the toilet quits refilling and then I can flush it again, and same thing when I got into radiation, I laid on the table and I'm like, okay, every time I'm in here, I have to think about what am I grateful for? Every time I was in the MRI machine, because, oh my God, the MRI machine was painful. You're in there for an hour face down and you can't move. And then you have no idea what they're seeing behind you. So you freak out the whole time you're in there. I had to think about being on Big Floyd Lake. And that was the lake I grew up on with my mom and dad and floating on an air mattress. And you go back through all those things in your head and you're so grateful for memories and nostalgia and things that carry you through. but it takes a village. No one takes this journey on their own. No one does.
And a lot of people, don't reach out to people. I mean, they maybe do it, more low key than what you did. I think people really keep it really low key. And so they don't have this group of people or people that feel comfortable knowing that you're open and willing to talk and willing to, go through it and just be real about it. That's the other thing that I noticed you going through all this is just super, super real. I mean, it is what it is. You would tell things that, a lot of people would probably be embarrassed about. And
right.
it kind of lightens it for people who are trying to support you because people don't know what to say. People aren't
that's it.
good at saying things sometimes. So when you put stuff out there that are,
well, right off the bat, people
so
would say to me, I'm sorry. And my immediate response is, well, why are you sorry? Unless you prayed for me to get cancer, you shouldn't be sorry.
Right.
So instead, why don't you say, I'm cheering you on, or I know you can do it. For me, that's what I needed to hear.
Mm-hmm.
The other part about being bald, I can't tell you, Tiffany, how many people I ran into where I'd be walking through an airport, walking through the mall, downtown Minneapolis. I'd see a woman across the way, bald as I was, and immediately it was this 30 seconds of, I'm stage whatever. I just got done with chemo. How about you? I'm going to pray for you. And then they disappear. And that was it. And it was like this club you were in.
Yeah.
And, and I've told the story.
Yeah.
After radiation, I got on the airplane flying back from Florida, and it was the Fargo Marathon. And it's 11 o'clock at night and I'm in Chicago. And I'm a strong believer that people show up in your life when they need to. And I get on the airplane, it's dark, and this woman gets on next to me and she's full of energy and she's vivacious. And I look at her, and when you fly, I have to wear a sleeve because I'm lucky that I don't have lymphedema per se, but I have to wear the sleeve. And she pointed to my sleeve, and I was all prepared to give her this spiel about I'm not a runner, I have breast cancer. And she looked at me and she goes, are you a survivor too? And I was like, what? And she leaned over, hugs me, looks me in the eye, and she said, you were meant to be an inspiration. You need to be an inspiration and tell your story to others. And in 30 seconds flat, she had 24 lymph nodes removed. She was a runner. She told me, you need to eat dark chocolate and wear lipstick. I mean, she just blew my socks off.
Yeah.
And then boom, she was gone out of my life. And, I had a moment of, did I see her even?
Right.
But those people coming out of your lives, and that's the other thing I think I've learned through this, is every day someone presents themselves. I look how you and I reconnected, and I look at all the cool encounters I've had and all the people who've stopped to hug me. For a while, we couldn't go downtown Fargo because we'd go downtown Fargo and every person on the planet would come out of somewhere and say, can I touch your head? It's like being pregnant. Can I touch your head? Can I pray for you? We've had people pray for us. I've had people hug me. We've been at sporting events where people have come up and said, I need to know what your story is because
you're like an actual rock star.
Totally. But again, the cool part was the instantaneous energy that I got from people. Again, the downside was having to talk to my kids because there was a point where they're like, we don't want to go with you anymore because we're sick of talking about it. Sure. So we kind of had to mitigate it, And then it was my dad, who is, he was older generation, not sure we should be talking about all this stuff, but he really wanted to cheer me on. So yeah, it was kind of navigating all of it. But what it came back to, Tiffany, what worked for me. And that's what everybody needs to know. What works for them. And the only message I can give you is be educated, be empowered. Don't be afraid to ask. You have to know your own baseline. You have to figure out what's going to work for you. You can either be empowered and you can have some control and you can influence, but you need to be aware because you don't have a spare body in the trunk of your car. You don't get a second chance. I'm never going to be 30 again. I'm never going to be 40 again. But man, when I'm going into 60, 70, 80, 90, when you come to my 100th birthday party, I want to say I kicked it the best I could. And that's a gift. And we need to be aware of that.
Yeah, that is, I think, and I'm not the only one that said this to you, that you need to write a book. I mean, people have said that to me as well. But people, like you said, coming out of the woodwork saying, you got to share your story. And one thing I talked to when I talked to a group in Mayville a couple last week, I think it was, was that, a story not told is not serving anybody. And so this is what this is about, and to make sure that people get this information. Again, everybody's journey is different, but take some hope and take some of these little nuggets that you have, and
and don't wait to get sick before you change anything. That'd be the huge one, is what can you do to, like, tomorrow, if all you can do is get up and walk around the block for 14 minutes, gosh, get up and walk around the block for 14 minutes.
Exactly. Well, people are saying, Wendy from Mayville, Wendy Sohold says, you are truly an inspiration, Chris. And Steve thanks you for sharing your journey, class of 86 strong.
Oh, Steve Kuntz, yay! And Wendy Sohold's my neighbor, yay!
Yep. And I have to go back here a second. Ellen had said, I'm at 10 years being cancer-free. I had a bilateral mastectomy with reconstructive surgery at the same time. I did not have to go through the chemo, which I'm extremely thankful. And thanks you for telling your story.
Oh my gosh. And I had a woman come up to me a couple of weeks ago and say, I'm 27 years cancer-free. I love hearing those stories. We need to hear that, because what she went through 10 years ago, Ellen did, compared to what I went through. Think of the difference in technology and drugs. And I have such admiration for anyone that's gone through this. I mean, and for anybody who's coming behind me, I hate saying this, but the rate of this, it's almost not if, it's when. And so how are we going to prepare for it? How are we going to make people aware? And for me, it's the message is, God darn it, get your tests. I look back, do I think, sometimes I'm like, what if I had gotten my mammogram sooner? Well, that wouldn't have not had me have cancer, right? It just might have changed the stage where I was and everything. Right. But, you have to be aware, and you need to have those tests, and you need to have a good relationship with your medical providers, and you need to take heed to when they tell you to manage everything. And because I was in good shape, oh my gosh, I handled the port with ease. My blood pressure went down. A lot of people in treatment have starts and stops because they're not in good health. So that was the extra bonus for me, was being able to kind of, ramp off of that as I move forward.
Right. Well, so just to summarize here, as we can kind of wrap up, I mean, if people have any more questions or thoughts, go ahead and post them. I'm checking my phone here on the side, but so let's just summarize, like, the take home messages, the ahas, the whatever you want to call it, that you found for people going through something like this, or like you said, you don't have to have cancer to do these things. Yep. What are those 3 to 5 things you would said?
The aha for me was, like I said, they give you a survivorship booklet, and it's got all these pieces of paper in it. And, I looked at them, I'm like, oh my God, they're quite frankly intended to scare the crap out of you, which is good, because then you go back to, but what blew me away was I could have taken a pen and crossed out the word cancer and just added in, like I said, any disease state, anything. And so the message I would tell people, number one, know your body and do your tests and your preventative care. Number two, don't be afraid. I think fear immobilizes us to understand and to figure out where we need to go. Reach out for help, so that you make sure that you are eating right. If you are not on the radar for anything, and you're watching this and you're 22 and you're like, yeah, whatever, she's 50, blah, she drank too much wine, it's not me. My message to you would be, then, oh my gosh, take care of yourself, because you get one body, you get one life. We're never going to have this moment again. You get one shot to do it right. And you've been given the greatest gift. I think the part that blew me away was, my body is what moves me through life. Now, you can argue spirit and soul and all those other things, but the body is what's keeping me all together. And you need to take care. It's your vehicle. You need to take care of it. And I'm not saying don't have fun, and I'm not saying be a plant-based vegan like I'm going to be here. But I am saying to you, the aha was, having gone through all of this, I am not doing anything post-cancer that I shouldn't have been doing pre-cancer to take care of myself.
Right.
Now, am I walking? Am I walking because that will help minimize reoccurrence? Sure. Should I have been walking all along? Sure. So that's the aha moment, is, you can sit and say, well, I don't have that, or that. Well, okay, I don't care what you have. You should be taking care of yourself.
Right. Yeah, it's just truly, truly an inspiration. Lori Baldock says, thanks, Chris, for reminding us life is a gift and we get one chance. We have to be an advocate for ourselves. And Tiffany, your saving grace with your business and wisdom. Thank you. Thank you. That's very sweet. And Sandy says, motivation goddess, you are.
And I have to, all right. And Lori Baldock is one of the people that showed up at my house. Whoops. Am I still there?
Yep, you are.
Okay. Lori Baldock was one of the people that showed up at my house, the gift of a quilt. And I don't know if Lori knows this, but that was one of my favorite things and is still on my bed. So those gifts that people give you mean so much. And that was the other lesson I learned from this. I have one friend who sent me a card every 2 weeks, Kelly Carlsted and Bruce Carlsted from
nice.
Devil. Yeah. And all they did was send me a card. I have another friend, Beth Nepstead, who would text me in the morning. It's the little things we can do for people. We tend to think we need to do grandioso things. Wendy Solholt was one of the ones who would tell me she loved me when she saw me and hugged me. And it's those little things that mean so much. So on the non-cancer side of this, think about what people are going through. And it doesn't have to be a grandioso gesture. It can be something as little as a text message that says, I'm thinking about you. Yeah. And that'd be the other piece I learned from this experience.
Yeah. To go back to that, like people don't know what to say or do. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It just the little things. Exactly. That's awesome. Yep. Good to know. All right. Well, I'm not getting any questions. It's just more, you're awesome. Thanks for being an inspiration, that kind of thing, which is very, very true. So, but I will just say that if people do have any questions after the fact, after watching this, if you're watching on a replay, type questions in and, we'll be back on and we can answer that, or I'll take Chris or whatever. So anyway, all right.
Or if anybody wants to talk, if anybody wants to talk to me as well, Tiffany, about their story, if they're afraid to share anything, you can share my contact info too.
Okay, perfect. That would be very helpful, I'm sure. All right. Well, thank you everybody for popping on, and thank you so much for Chris for sharing your story. It's going to help so many people. So appreciate that.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was fun.
Yeah. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.